That's everything for topic 2. Topic 3 is file I/O. This is one of those things that is, it's kind of a tip of the iceberg thing. There's a lot that can happen with file I/O. There's a lot of cleansing that can be dealt with. In this course, we're going to kind of do some simple file I/O, but this is the kind of thing that you can really expand on. You can do a lot with, but we're going to introduce it so you can get a little bit comfortable with it. So you can create files directly from Python, or you can overwrite existing files, or you can append to existing files. So that you get multiple different options there. Here's a snippet of code where I am going to write some data into a file. And the with open item is really useful, and here's the reason. When you do with open, what it does is it opens the file, and if it doesn't exist, it creates it. In this case, the W parameter, there's multiple parameters in Blackboard that you'll be able to see, but the W parameter that I have right here tells it to overwrite the file if it already exists. So it either creates a file or overwrites the existing file. And then it will do everything that's tabbed in, so in this case, the rest of the program. And then at the end, it will automatically close the file for you. And the reason that's important is because you don't want to leave file opens hanging out there, especially if you have a program that's going to try to continue to use those files. So this is a structure I strongly suggest you use whenever you're either utilizing a file or creating a file, that you use the with open option, because then you don't have to worry about closing it. It automatically happens once the code has completed running. So with open, so everything that's tabbed in here will be done with the file. And I do as file because then I can use that alias for everything that I'm doing in here. So it's going to create a file called maps file. It's going to write to it, and it's going to first say file.write. It's going to write a line of text, and I've got that \n, which will be a line feed in the next line. And then it's going to write another line of text, and then it's going to write even more text. So I'm just going to jump over to my folder view here. I put this into its own special folder. You can see there's nothing here but my program. If I now run this code, you can see the code is completed. If I go back over to my view, you can see that I now have a file that wasn't here before. And I can open this file, and you can see my data in it. So just like that, I've created a brand new file on my computer. It's in the Jupyter Notebooks view, but if you go and you can use your Windows Explorer or your Mac Explorer out, you can find it in that folder where my program is. So that's writing a file. Here's another one. I am, again, with open, same file name. I am doing W as file, and then I'm going to write some text, and I'm going to write another line of text. So if I run this one, and I go back over to my file, you can see that because I used W as my parameter, it overwrote what was there. So it deleted what I had, created another version of the file, and then put the text in there that I asked it to do. So you do have to be careful about that kind of stuff when you use W. I can add data to an existing file. So again, same file again, but this time instead of a W, I'm using A, and what A means is append. So I'm going to append to the existing file. And it's file.write, and I'm going to do a new line, first of all, and then I'm going to put some more text in, and then another new line, and then I'm going to put some more text in. So when I run this, again, I'm going over to my file, I'm just refreshing the window so it grabs the copy of the file again, and you can see that instead of overwriting what was already there, it just added it to the end of the file. So that's appending. I can access data in an existing file to use in my program. This is really powerful. This is not what you would use for a CSV file. There are special read.csv functions for that. This would just be a generic file, like maybe you have I like to pull down digital text from Project Gutenberg, which is just books essentially in a text format you can get, and I can access the words in them that way to utilize in my programs. That's a good example of where you would use something like this. But in this case, I am going to access data in a file. So again, I'm using that same file again. Now you've seen the file, it's got like 3 lines in it, right? I'm going to open that file as file, and then I'm going to say for each line in the file, just print the line. So if I run this, you can see here's the contents of that file printed to my screen. Now that's not super useful, but it is a way to pull data into my program. I didn't have to print that line. I could have assigned that line to a list or something if I wanted to utilize that data. But I have now pulled data in from a file into my program. And here you can see I've, again, grabbing that same file, and I am creating a variable called file.readLines, and then I'm going to print that. So you can see here, in this case, I actually did put it into a list. So by doing the readLines method, it is taking the file and grabbing all of the lines, and for each line, it is creating an item in a list. So my file had 3 lines. So here's the first line in my file. Here's the second line in my file. And here's the third line. So I pulled it all in and I got it into a list format, which is really powerful because you can do a ton of things with lists, obviously, as we saw earlier. You can also do them all together, right? You can read a file, edit the data, and output it back into the file. That shouldn't be a surprise. I'm going to create a file of numbers, read it into Python, square the numbers, and output it back to the file. So I'm doing all of the things I've just shown you kind of at once as a group. So first I'm going to create a file with 5 rows. And now this is a new file. This is different than what I did before. So I'm going to create a brand new file. I'm using W, so I know it's going to create a brand new file. It's either going to create a new one or it's going to overwrite one that's already there. And then I'm going to say for x in range 0 to 5. So that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, just through 4 because it doesn't do the end. I'm going to write string x. So I'm taking the range and converting it to a string. I'll explain that here in just a minute. So if I go back over to my browser, well, one moment. Okay, so you can see my new file exists down. So this is a file. It's just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, as we expected. Now I go to the next one. And now this is kind of a long one here. So I'm going to read the file into a list. So I'm going to create an empty list, initialize it. All right, yeah, an empty list called file_var. And then I'm going to, with open, I'm going to read it. So I use R, which means you read the file, which means you cannot edit it when you open it in this manner. You just read only. And I'm going to say for each line in the file, first of all, I'm going to assign the line to a variable called line. And I'm going to do .strip, which is really nice because it gets rid of that \n, the line feed or the next line item. So it makes the data cleaner. And then I'm going to just append it to my file variable. So in the end, I'm going to get all 5 of my numbers back into my program in a list called file_var. And then I'm going to, again, here's my file out. This is what I'm going to put it into before I write it. And I'm going to say for x in range, length of file_var. So for every item in my list, I want to square the item, which is what I'm doing here, converting it to a string, and then I'm going to append it to file out. So I've taken my file in list, manipulated it, put it into a new list called file out, and now I am ready to print it. I'm going to go to a different view here because it goes off the bottom of the screen. I am ready to put it back out to my list or out to my file. So now I'm going to create my read writing example file, which already exists. So I'm going to overwrite my existing file because you can see W. And for each item in file out list, I'm going to write it to my file. And then I'm going to add a \n to it to do the next line. So when I run this line, or this section of code, I go back out to my file, you can see it was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. When I refresh, it's now 0, 1, 4, 9, 16. So I've taken that data in, I've manipulated it, stored it, and then output it back to the file. Pretty powerful stuff. I mean, this example isn't super useful, of course, but it is a good demonstration of what it can do. So I had said I was going to explain this. So all data that comes in from a file is going to be considered a string type in Python. It just, no matter what comes in, Python will always treat it as a string. Likewise, if you want to write anything out to a file, you must first convert it back into a string. You cannot output numbers. It's just kind of a thing. So just be aware of that. If you start getting errors, it's probably because you're trying to write a list of integers or something like that to the file instead of a string. So just as you're getting ready to output it, just convert it to string and then output it. And when you import it, if you know it's numbers coming in, just convert it into a number as it comes in.